Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinars. Tonight, I had a couple of thoughts before we started. Part of this webinar comes from a request from the Evoke therapist to create a refresher for parents. And I had a couple of thoughts leading into that. Number one, it's this idea that we don't want to dictate everything that we do in these phone calls and in these letter writing assignments. But part of what happens is if we can give some guidelines, some to dos and not to dos, I think it can really build some skills. And here's an important thought that I have about this. I've had so many people over the years, so many families ask me, "Where's the therapy? What's the therapy that we're getting provided?" Even those families who are attending my own phone calls weekly and also the webinars. And I think a lot of times what happens is we don't know. When we're being coached on a letter, we don't internalize that or qualify that necessarily as therapy. And it is. A lot of the times, a lot of the guidance and coaching that you're getting is akin to therapy. It's new skills. And then sometimes from those skills, there becomes a new way of thinking or a new insight. So this is an intention. This webinar, this intention is to create some guidelines and some tools and some skills and some to dos and not to dos. Not so much so that you feel anxious about getting it wrong, but to give you some new ways of thinking about that. And I'm going to mention this later on in the webinar because it's on one of the slides. But this is important. It's not about getting it perfect and not about getting it right. So many parents over the years have expressed and been scared. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to mess up. And what I hope is, and I'll talk about this on the slide when it comes, is that you don't see it as getting in trouble or getting it wrong, but as an opportunity to think about it a different way. So just give it a try and don't get it right, but just put yourself out there. Again, like I said, we'll mention that as we get to it. So let's talk about the letters that you get. And again, I know there's generalization to other areas in life with raising children, but I'm going to talk about them specifically with letters. I want you to be aware of, even if it's not conscious, but sometimes it's conscious that your child is considering the audience. They're thinking about how you're going to react to it. And so much of the time, the reaction you have emotionally was the intended reaction. And I've told this story before, but years ago, when I had a mother upset at me, I was actually covering for a therapist, and I had a mother upset at me because her son had gone out of the field for some routine medical procedure. I think he had an ingrown toenail or something like that. He'd gone out of the field, and because of the weather and the lateness in the day, they decided to house him at base overnight until the next day. And then she called me and found out about it from the letter from her son and got really upset about it. And first of all, I apologized that we hadn't communicated that to her. But I said, now that I've kind of attended to the customer service piece, can I speak about the therapeutic piece? And she said, of course, sure. And so I said, I think that was the intent of your son, to get this kind of reaction. She said, oh, no, 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 not at all. He mentioned it in passing, almost as if it was a privilege. And so I said, okay, I just wanted you to consider that possibility because the strong reaction you're right now that you're having is suggesting to me that that might be part of your dynamic. So I go back out into the field the following week, and before I even get to the group, this one student whom I had not had a lot of interaction with met me from my vehicle to as I was approaching the group, and he said, "What did my mom say when she got the letter? Was she upset?" And then, of course, I told her that story later that week. And so, even in a situation where it seems so casual, your child is considering the audience. It's really one of those dynamics that even as another parent, a co-parent, I can see the way that my daughters and my son might hook my wife and vice versa. And as a therapist or as an outsider, you can kind of see that. But the dance is so unconscious, the dance is so automatic that sometimes we can't see it. But just have that idea in your mind that they have considered the audience. Let's talk about the kinds of letters that you get. And I think the parent coordinators in our early webinars prepare you for these, but of course you can get the angry letter or even the intimidating letter, the sad letters, the grief and pulling at your heartstrings, the promise letters. That is, I'm cured. I used to joke about this idea that clients would say to me, you've sent me to the program I don't need to be at, but it worked in the first few days. And so any more of it will be a waste of time. So I would just say to you that it would be wise to be patient and watch it play out and not assume that this flight to health, this fixed piece, it really means anything except for I want out of here. Um, the, 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 the letters about control where your child doesn't write very much or write something very cryptic, right? Very limiting. And those are those letters that are about power and control, trying to get you hooked in, right? Trying to make you feel something, some loss, some powerlessness. I don't know what's going on. And that's not an uncommon letter for a student to write, a client to write, or a parent to get. And of course, there's lots of variations, but those are some of those. We want you to know this. The letters are guided by therapy in the field, but we rarely dictate them. And what I mean by guided by, of course, we'll sit and read the letter that you've written to your child that week. And it might be part of our therapy discussion. Somewhere in the middle between 40 and 60%, we're reading those letters in session, or at least discussing the content of them in session with your child, amongst all the other things that we're talking about, the here and now, the history, the assignments that they have. But at any rate, we're discussing those letters. And so as we do therapy with them, there are ideas, there are tools that are discussed. So when parents ask us, did this letter get assigned to him or was he dictated this? Unless it was a specific assignment, like the letter of accountability or the impact letter that they write to you or the war story letter that they write, and those will usually be labeled. Other than those, if it's a letter, just a letter, it's rarely dictated by us at any level, except for the fact that in this therapy session, we talked about tools and skills and ideas, and they've decided to present that way. And again, like all of these letters, take a step back, be patient, and know that, especially for a wilderness program, especially for an experiential program, the proof is in the action. The proof comes over time. And what we say, and I've used this example so many times, if any of you have ever set a goal, a diet, how many times have you said passionately that you want something or that you have this particular goal and then had struggles or challenges meeting your goal? So it's just like those things. If not consciously manipulative, it can be simply those things. You might get several assignment letters throughout the program. And again, those are going to be more dictated and they'll typically be labeled. Sometimes you're going to read or get several of the same assignment. So like I would often send every version of the letter of accountability home to parents because I wanted them to see the difference in the progress, and it's pretty subtle. And sometimes it's important to say, okay, what am I seeing different? What's different about this one? What is he or she learning? What are they being coached about in their therapy? And then seeing the process, not the outcome. See, the letter of accountability is not the goal. Accountability is the goal. The letter of accountability is just our tool to help teach accountability. One of my favorite letters that a student or client writes is the response to a parent's impact letter, or is the response to the letter that they get after the letter of accountability, where the parent has their reaction and the student or client writes back, because those begin to illustrate how they're reacting in the relationship to parents. So the process, how we're learning to relate to each other, is what we're focusing on. And the letters are just these static moment in time. The angry ones, the sad ones, the super motivated ones are all just static moments in time. And really what's going on for them is an entire week, an entire process. And there's some benefit for you all participating in that with your child, and for not participating in the day-to-day up and down, right? That's part of what trains or teaches or creates a different experience for you with your child, is that you're not riding the roller coaster and feeling every bump and every turn with them. You're having these weekly letters and these weekly updates, and that's scary. It feels like there's no control. But part of the benefit of this program is that distance modeling or creating an exoskeleton, a scaffolding, if you will, to build differentiation. And differentiation is defined as healthy separation and connection occurring simultaneously. So there's a process going on out there, and these letters are just a snapshot of that process. I say this all the time with about phone calls, letters, interactions, even at home. It's important that you have your parent filter. It's very important, and if you watch any number of webinars, you've heard me talk about listening to your child maybe more than anything else. At the same time, it's important to run that through the parent filter. So when you have this reaction to your child, to take a step back and say, okay, what's my knee-jerk reaction? What's going on for me? It's almost never been the case that the 10-page letter or 8-page letter that I've received from a parent the night after they received a letter from their child was an ideal letter. When I wake up in the morning in my inbox on Thursday morning and I see a long letter from a parent to a child, it's almost never ideal or healthy. And oftentimes I'll say, this is an exercise actually in you finding yourself, but let's talk about this. Let's talk about where this might go. And maybe even think of it as journaling, right? But let's have this session. Let's talk about where he's at, and let's talk about your intention, and then let's match a letter back to him or to her that lines up with your intention and with the circumstances. I think writing the unsent letter at times can be very helpful for parents, and it can be a learning process. And then I think part of what we might do at times is do some editing. We don't edit every letter every week. And I just talked to the Evoke therapist about this last week. They don't want to do that every week. They want to coach principles and skills, but to nitpick and to create these sterile, ideal letters from parents doesn't make a lot of sense. So run it through your parent filter. It's like this one. I have parents say, can I ask my 17-year-old son where he would like to go or what he would like in a therapeutic school after Evoke? And my response is, we can ask him anything. But you have this parent hat, this parent filter that we're going to run it through and decide after the phone call or after the letter if it's important. If he says, I just want to be around girls and I want to be able to wear my own clothes, we're not going to probably put as much weight on those requests as we would on a student who might say, I want something that's going to help me prepare for college, or I want something that's also giving me an opportunity to work with my hands, or that gives me access to the outdoors, or that I can keep active with. So we're going to put more weight on those things that you value and that you and I, through our discussions, believe and prioritize are important features that are healthy for your child. So we listened, we heard it, but we don't need to treat it like it's an equal vote in the decision-making process. And sometimes with young adults, you move more towards that. And again, I always say that if a child under the age of 18 describes a list of features that are a part of a healthy treatment plan, then why not meet that? So running everything through the parent filter and learning how your parent filter works is really important. So let's talk about what else to do. We're going to guide you about letters, but we're not going to dictate them to you. And part of what I do on phone calls with parents is it's easier for me actually to say what not to do than it is to say what to do. And don't write a good letter. And later on in the bottom here, you'll see write a bad letter. And what I mean is stop thinking about getting it perfect. Just try to be honest. Try to incorporate the skills and tools, and you might mess up. You probably will. Right? It takes a lot of time, a lot of practice to perfect or move up your skill level, your skill set in letter writing and communication. So try to remove the idea of writing a good letter. When I was writing my book in the last couple of years, the best advice that I ever got was don't write a book. Just write. When you think about writing a book, first of all, you're intimidated by that project. And second of all, you're trying to write every sentence, every paragraph, every page perfect. Just get your thoughts out and you can go back and edit it later. And that really can apply to what we all do with you when you're writing things. Don't write a good letter, write a bad letter. Write a letter that is just honest. And then we might coach or guide, or afterwards we might say, here's how he or she reacted to it. And I'm going to talk about their reaction later on in the webinar. Don't lecture. They already got it. They got the lectures. They give them to everybody else out in the field. Once they're in the program, 4 or 5 weeks, they have all of your lectures, coming out of their mouth towards the newer students. Be wary of comforting or rescuing them. Much of the time when we attempt to comfort or rescue our child from feelings, we're really dismissing their feelings. We're trying to explain them away, teach them away, talk them out of it. Think of it this way. Look at it this way. Let me teach you something so you won't feel sad, so you won't be in pain or afraid. So be very wary. Ask yourself a lot of difficult questions before you start writing something comforting. And sometimes it's as easy as asking yourself, why am I writing this? What do I want from this? And if the answer to that question is, I want them to think or I want them to feel, you're probably getting off track because you're not in charge of what they think and feel. They are. You're in charge of what you think and feel. And so when you're writing letters, and this goes over every one of these issues, not just comforting, but ask yourself, why am I saying this sentence? I remember I was teaching a parent support group. I've told this letter many times, teaching this idea of an intentionality in communication. And one of the parents said, and I was talking about not guilting. I was talking about setting healthy boundaries, listening, making it about your child, not about you, meaning that it's for their benefit. Yes, it hurts you. Yes, it affected you, but what you really want for them is to have a healthy, happy life. And somebody asked the question, can I tell my child about the burden this is financially? And before I could answer the question, and I wasn't going to answer it, I was going to answer it with a question. Somebody else stole it from me and they said, why are you writing it? And the first parent paused and stuttered a bit and finally answered and said, because I want her to feel guilty. And I said, so that just goes right in the face of what we've been talking about. And I know a lot of you might be thinking that guilt might be helpful, but look at the webinar on shame and guilt, and you'll hear about the philosophy that we have about not using that to motivate clients and students. Be wary of teaching. Again, they know stuff already. They just don't want to accept it or live it, or it's hard, or it's painful, or they're angry and in a power struggle. So teaching is a lot like lecturing. Don't try to convince them of things. And you don't need to justify your behavior. You don't need to apologize for what you've done. You don't need to apologize for not trusting them. So many parents feel this pressure that I need to trust. What can I do to trust my child? And I'll often say, slow down. Let's talk about it before you rush into trusting them. Because your distrust might be wise. It might be your wise mind. And then the second part of that is a lot of parents think, well, if I don't trust them and they've told me this, then they feel so bad about themselves. And I will slow you down again and say, it's okay for you to have your feeling and to own it. And it's okay for them to hear it. And if you're responsible, and this goes to about everything we talk about, if you're responsible for what they're feeling and thinking, they're in a whole lot of trouble. And then they are right to blame you. And you don't want that, of course, for them or for you. You don't have to apologize for consequences. Alliances, like with your therapist, they'll say things like, you're just listening to the therapist, and my response would be, right, that's what people do. I listen to my medical doctor. I listen to my dentist. I listen to my doctor. I listen to these people. I don't swallow everything that they say without digesting it or thinking about it, but I'm trying something different in my life, in my relationship. So you don't have to apologize for those alliances. You don't have to apologize for getting help and guidance. It's just okay. They'll say to me often, they're just listening to the therapist, and I say, so let me get this straight. You don't want them to listen to anybody's advice, anybody's guidance, except for yours. Is that where we're at right now? And really, that is the manipulation. That is the request. You don't have to apologize for acquiring these new skills and sounding like a therapist or somebody who's had therapy. It's okay for you to bring up the past. And I always say this goes back to the trusting piece. If you are stuck, we'll challenge you on that. But oftentimes we're going to empower and validate that trust and not ask you to dismiss it on their timetable. Because people, if you've done something and you're accountable, you allow people to forgive and trust you on their timetable, not on your timetable. That's part of accountability. That's a core piece of accountability. Don't avoid difficult topics. This is still under the don't category. Don't avoid difficult topics. And then letting go of the outcome. You write your letter, you write it from your center, you write it from your truth, you do the best, and then what their reaction to it is theirs. And that's where I go right into write a bad letter. I have so many parents who will say to me, oh, I must have written a bad letter because he was upset or she was upset with me. And my response is, that's not evidence of you writing a bad letter. That's evidence of them feeling what they feel. In fact, many times when parents have that experience, I think they've written a very, very healthy letter. But it is it's a difference from the way that they used to be interacting with their child. Let's talk about themes as you move through the program. Early, there's going to be more impact type letters. And sometimes they need to come more than just once, holding their feet to the fire, saying, I'm not going to argue with you in these letters. I'm not going to accept this old way of you badgering me or promising. I've heard this before. You can't intimidate me. If you don't love me and forgive me, I'll have to live with that because I can't live the other way. So early on, you're still setting. Some parents get emotionally tired and vulnerable during these early days because they want to write this letter that goes back to how much they love them and miss them. And that can be a part of any part of the letter. But you don't have to back off from the boundary from the message that you've sent initially. So you might be asked to write more than one or several in a series of letters that have that impact letter quality to them. During the middle, you're slow to believe. That's a wise thing. That's a healthy thing. That's why they're in wilderness therapy instead of an outpatient therapy. And you have this attitude. So much of what I teach is what goes on inside of your head. You don't use what I teach and go to them and say, "Hey, I don't have to listen to you anymore when you yell at me or when you swear at me." You just don't listen to them when they yell or swear. But when you sometimes quote the therapist or quote a book or quote me, you're trying to not set a boundary and ask them to go by this authority figure that you're pulling into the room. So you're slow to believe, you have a show me attitude, and I often say, we'll see. I have so many students and clients over the years. Tell me what they're going to do and tell me how they're changing. My response is, and I don't mean this sarcastically, is, we'll see. Okay, great. I'm glad. I'm looking forward to it. And that sounds flippant when I'm role modeling it right there, but that's the attitude that I have inside of my head. And it's okay to have guarded optimism. I go back to this idea that you don't have to rush in out of this guilt or pressure or obligation to trust. You can have your feelings, you can have your doubts, you can be skeptical. That's okay. And if it gets stuck or if it's inappropriately matched to what's going on in the process, then your therapist can challenge you on that. Stay away, toward the end, stay away from future information. Unless specifically your therapist asks you to do it, and there are times when they do, don't talk about future information, including hints or alluding to something. And parents will often try to sneak that in, especially as the child is getting eager to leave, hopeful to leave. Time is flying. They often are the senior member of the group, and their friends have left, and so parents want to say things like it won't be long or something that suggests that it's happening soon. This is maybe one of the most important things. Do not sell aftercare plans. Every time you find yourself saying positive about an aftercare plan, say something you think they might not like, right? Don't sell them it by saying, we've searched the world, we have these experts, we visited five, we've done all of our research, everybody we've talked to thinks it's wonderful, on and on and on. You don't need to do that. I always compare it to movies. I don't know if you have this experience, but I have most of my life where somebody, or even myself, I just am looking forward to with great eagerness an upcoming movie, or somebody tells me how wonderful it is. It's hard for to live up to that. I'm gonna just naturally kind of look for the things I don't like about it. So don't sell it to them. You can talk about it, introduce it when it's suggested by the therapist, but just talk about it matter of factly. And I always just ask parents, introduce two or three things while you're talking about it, just as this kind of protection against this that you think they might not like about it, and then let them have their feelings. Um, you can talk about deep talk. You can talk about here and now, but it's okay to talk about deep topics even at the end, even if you fear that those topics, excuse me, might turn out some uncomfortable feelings or some uncomfortable conversation between the two of you. A lot of parents, as their children make some really great initial strides in this process, don't want to upset the apple cart by talking about something difficult, and that doesn't serve anybody very well. The content of your letters. What should I write? You can write about the past and the present feelings that you have and be honest. You can write and react to their letters. Of course, we encourage you to take into consideration before you do that the therapist report because they're going to put something into perspective. Because that letter, being the snapshot that it is, might not reflect the entire theme of the week or any part of the week. You can react to ask questions about the weekly journal that you see on the parent portal. You can talk about your life, things that are going on with you, exciting things, difficult things that are going on with you. Typically, unless it's suggested, We want you to avoid discussions of boyfriends and girlfriends and close friends. There can be a point when we introduce more of that information and even some of that interaction later in the program, but typically you're going to avoid that. Talk about your life, because part of what happens when they get out of this place of pain and of anger and of being closed off is they actually start to value you. And there's an interesting thing for me to watch. How interested do they get in what's going on with the parents? And when children say to me, whether they're young adult or adolescent children, say to me, my dad or my mom are just talking about what's going on about, they just went home for the holidays. And I don't really care about that. And I say to them, that's interesting. That's interesting that you don't care about what's going on for them. What's the relationship about? Is it only about them being an ATM machine? Or is this just about anger? Is there hurt that will prevent you from connecting to them? So you can talk about your life. You can talk about goals in therapy for them, for you. Um, you can talk about the boundary that you're setting. A lot of times the boundary is just short. Boundaries are shortly expressed and often more effectively and potently expressed by actions or by ignoring something. You can talk about your feelings. You can talk about what you hear your child saying. That's a really important part of it. You're modeling the communication model through letters. Sometimes you're mirroring back frustration or tone. Therapists will often coach you on that. You can practice assertiveness and telling the truth and finding your center. I said this just the other night, years ago, when letters were mostly passed along through the U.S. mail. Some people had fax machines. There was not the technology there is today to post them online to any degree whatsoever. I loved it back then because parents would have to write a letter, and so would students for that matter, before they got a letter from the other one for that week. And people would always say to me, I don't know what to write. And my response is, just write your truth. And back then, it was a easier thing to do to coach people just to focus on what's going on for them instead of reacting to the other. And I think it was, of course, the adding of technology that made this that required it to be a more conscious process. Like I said earlier, coaching you about letters or a phone call, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, is not getting into trouble. You didn't get in trouble. You didn't get it wrong. You gave us an opportunity to teach a principle. And if you're worried about, if you're walking on eggshells, you're treating your child like they're fragile, and you're also bumping up against your own vulnerability, which I'll talk about again later. So take risks. Be honest. When I had my son in wilderness therapy, the coaching that I got from a consultant that wasn't even my consultant, but I'll always remember it, as he said to me, you're trying to be a good client and a good parent. And it's getting in the way of you being honest, and it's getting in the way of you getting what you need to out of this program. And he was right. I wanted to be the ideal client that I had always dreamed of having as a wilderness therapist. And I wasn't being honest, and I wasn't getting what I needed out of it. So take risks. Allow us to see you and then to teach you something, to coach you about something. And like I said earlier, their reaction is not evidence of the quality of your communication or letters. It can inform you, but it's not the truth about what is. It's just something to listen to and to consider. And again, then we run it through the executive filter that we all are a part of. Like I said, impact letters sometimes come again and again. Is self-disclosure appropriate? I'm a pro self-disclosure person. You may notice this from some of the webinars, but there might be some coaching around that. A lot of parents feel afraid that if they disclose too much that their child is going to use that as an excuse. My response is that's not your responsibility. That's theirs. They're going to use excuses whether they pin it to you or not, and whether you have a fear around that or not is really, that part's just about you. But if they're an excuse-making person, they're going to make excuses. If they're not, they're not. That's not about you. So we might coach. I've had some very powerful exchanges when parents have been vulnerable. And I often think that when parents will reverse roles and say, here's what I've struggled with about peer pressure, even today, instead of giving a lecture about peer pressure, what you will find is your child will begin to teach you about peer pressure. So sometimes not having the answer is really important. Plus, it helps them to feel like they're not the only one who doesn't have it all figured out. Who wants to talk to somebody? I would think, well, I'm talking personally right now, some of the most unpleasant people that I know have it all figured out. And that's no fun for me, and especially for a child. It's no fun to think their parents have all the answers. So share with them what you don't have figured out. Um, you can be chatty or newsy. There's time to do that. That's really sometimes a way to see how much they value the relationship outside of what you can give them. Sometimes that's a way to talk about things that are important to you. Sometimes that's a way to set a boundary that you're not going to engage some of the inappropriate things that they're writing to you. So that they can accomplish all those. If you are writing chatty or newsy letters to avoid difficult and important topics that ought to be discussed, not setting a boundary like I described just a minute ago, but actually it's an emotionally aversive response, then we would challenge that. Saying no or saying nothing can be really effective in letters. Saying nothing sometimes. If you've said no once, we're probably not going to ask you to say it over and over and over again. We're probably just going to ask you to say nothing about it. You can respond to letters, to updates to your life. You can write a complimentary letter. Sometimes that means that the parent who is the one that sets more boundaries might write a soft, more chatty, more nurturing letter. And the parent who often is the one who writes or focuses on that at home, the soft stuff, might write a more confrontive or limit setting letter or a feedback letter. So it's okay to switch it up a little bit. You can write a vacation letter. This is one of my favorite assignments. I used it all the time. We're going on therapeutic vacation this week. Until you engage, Brad, or put the name of the therapist in there, has asked us that we not write anything about therapy. So we're going to take a week off. Sometimes the letter ends there. Sometimes the letter the parents write is 2 sentences, 1 sentence. I usually want at least 1 sentence so the child gets the message that you've written. But oftentimes this metaphorical vacation from therapy is the best way to set a limit. And the best way to model, I'm not going to work harder than you. There's something that you have to do here. And I'm willing to do work. But I'm not going to play this game where it's one-sided because I'm being guilted or pressured or threatened. The no letter is rare, but it can happen. And then talk to us about how to express your anger in a way that is healthy, assertive, and still owns it. Because there is space for that. Sarcasm, name calling, punitive letters, sarcastic letters, of course, don't fall into that category of healthy letters. So let's talk about phone calls. Our intention at Evoke is that every student and client qualifies on the front end for the possibility and even probability of having phone calls, plural, with their parents while in the field. We see that as an effective way to begin dress rehearsal, if you will, to practice in real time what we're starting in letters, what the foundation that the letters and the field work has created. So one way you get them, it's all over the map. Some don't get them at all. And part of why I want to talk about this on these webinars is so that you can have a conversation with your therapist so that you understand the intention behind no phone calls or having phone calls. There's almost any reason to have a phone call except for I just miss him or her. That's probably one that we're not just going to have the phone call for, but you can have it as a reward for them getting healthier and less combative, less manipulative. You can have it because there's some work that needs to be done that only a phone call will bring out. You can do it because there's specific topics that we want to practice in real time. We can do it to give them a chance to practice some new skills, or you a chance to practice new skills. Years ago, I saw a therapist. I walked past a therapist's office, a wellness therapist's office, and he was doing a phone call with a family. I could tell from his side of the conversation that the parent and the child were having a lot of conflict on the phone because he was coaching and interrupting the student, the client. And I asked him afterwards, I said, I've only been waiting until the students are on water phase and are doing extraordinarily well before I'll do that. I don't want to give them a stage to abuse their parents. They've already had that. That's why they're here. And he said, that plays into it too for me. But sometimes I'll put a child on a phone call before he or she gets to that point so the parents can practice the skill of holding the boundary and practice reacting in a different way. So there's all kinds of reasons why we might put a child, a student, on a phone call with their parent. So do you understand that it's not just one reason? It's not just when they're going to do it perfectly. There might be some manipulation, and that manipulation is helpful for us because we see how the dynamic is, but it also is helpful for us because then we can support you and coach you about how not to respond to it. Oftentimes, sadness and homesickness is triggered on the phone calls. Let them feel it. Sometimes it's triggered in you, but everybody gets to feel what they get to feel, at least while they're in our program. We ask them to respond to our directions. Sometimes I've had to have parents hang up on a phone call, and that's been a really, really important intervention. Sometimes I've had students drop the phone because they got upset. What's the agenda? The agenda is often just to connect, just to practice, just to have a moment where you get to re-experience each other after some basic skills are involved. We asked the students, I just taught the therapist this week, that we often ask them, excuse me, to write an outline. We don't need them to stick to it, but we want them to have something in their mind because oftentimes their minds go blank when they get on the phone call. So asking them to talk about an agenda, and sometimes that's discussed in therapy session. You can watch for passiveness or regression. We think it's, like I said, this dress rehearsal or this litmus test. It also demonstrates for most people a lot of progress. The voice even sounds different. How they react sounds different. And it's good. It's good practice. It's good for them and for you to practice. I've said before that even when a child regresses, it's not bad. It's still good because it gives the parents an opportunity to do something different. You don't need to plan or rehearse it. Sometimes I would just spring it on parents because I didn't want them to be anxious for 6 days with this information. So I would spare them of that anticipation. And sometimes I've suggested that we're going to have it this upcoming week. And then because of something that's gone on the field, we don't have it. So we invite you. We hope that you can be flexible with when it occurs. When you get on the phone call, these are some guidelines. This is probably the most practical part of the webinar. Don't give future information. Unless you are specifically asked to, don't talk about the future. Don't rescue, let them have their feelings. They'll often go into sadness and missing you in a loving way, not in a pathetic, nagging, blaming way. They'll just say, I'm sad. I miss you. I feel homesick. Let them have their feelings. I can't tell you how many times I've said that to a parent before the child gets on the phone. And the automatic knee-jerk reaction is, Mom and Dad, I miss you so much. Sweetheart, it won't be that long. It's just so automatic for so many of us. So let them have their feelings. And then this piece of it, you don't have to take total control of the call, especially for younger adolescents, but sometimes for older ones. It's not your responsibility to make the call go well. Let them be responsible for at least 50% of the call. Don't fill in the empty spaces or ask questions to make sure that the conversation moves forward. Right? Let there be silence. Let there be pauses. Let them be responsible for part of the relationship instead of getting into this interview mode or suggesting topics mode. And then try to be honest in your reaction. Oftentimes, the calls will break up more than once during a phone call. Typically, we will do them for 20 or 30 minutes in the middle of your regularly scheduled parent call. And I'll have parents during those breaks when the phone drops for a moment and the child is calling back in. I'll have the parent say, gosh, I'm really feeling scared, or I'm really feeling impressed, or I'm really frustrated. And my response is tell him or her when they get back on the phone. See if they can let you have your feelings. And I'll coach you if it goes off track, but tell them how you're feeling. And sometimes parents have really profound, really passionate, really deep felt feelings that after the phone call is over, they'll tell me they felt, and I'll say, why didn't you share it with them? And oftentimes the response is something along the lines of, I didn't want them to feel, and then fill in the blank. Read and practice the I feel statement and reflective listening skills. Hopefully, if you're anticipating a phone call, you're watching this in the archives. But also reading and practicing the I feel statement and reflecting skills webinar could be very helpful, the communication webinar, to understand the language that they are being taught to use. Tackle tough issues without expecting to get closure on all topics, right? You're not going to come to resolution in 20 or 30 minutes. It goes by really fast, especially if we have several drops. But you can start something, and then that gives us as therapists chance to move forward with you and with them afterward. And then be patient with the static and time. The connections, even with satellite phones, that we have out there are not perfect. And so there's going to be drops and static and difficulty with time. So that's just wilderness therapy. I used to be so anxious and frustrated with that was outside of my control until I realized we were doing wilderness therapy. And then I then practice more patience and then pass it on to you. So everything is grist for the mill, good and bad. In fact, we have this saying that good is good and bad is good because we learn something either way as therapists. We have something to work with either way as therapists and clients and parents and families. Um, Learning and teaching you to model vulnerability by always being the beginner's mind, by being willing to listen and learn and be open and not get it right. And that's really humility, right? I can put myself out there and make mistakes, laugh at myself, chuckle at myself. My therapist always says the level of sense of humor in the client is one of the best about themselves is one of the best indications of mental health. So just be who you are and let us coach and let's talk about it. And then notice what you are learning rather than just taking directives. So back to this first idea at the beginning of the webinar. We have these letters, and that's a big part of our therapy. We have these phone calls, these mid-program visits. There's another webinar on those, and these end-of-program visits. And instead of just listening to the directives, what's the principle here? Because I mean, this is our greatest desire. We don't want to create a perfect scenario for you. We want to create a process where you learn and so that you can take it away. So you can understand, you know what, this is different than it was then, but I remember this principle. Ask myself tough questions, or it's okay to make mistakes, or I can't make them feel or think something, or their reaction is not about me. And so parents often will ask me one question and we'll go through a process and there's an aha moment or there's insight. And then when the situation slightly tweaks, they say, but this is different. My son's 18, not 17 now. My son or daughter is 13, or there's something new, or now there's drugs, or there's not drugs. And my response is, of course there are differences over time with each child and between children. But there are core principles that we learn. And that's why I believe and experience wholeheartedly that all of these webinars, that all of this stuff, and this is what my book talks about, all this stuff is applicable to all of our relationships. Any age, any circumstance. It's not easy. Sometimes we have to challenge ourselves, but they're not unique to the situation. And our life is not about these other people, even our children whom we love more than anyone. It's not about them. It's about us. And when we can do that work, then we can get to a place to be the best possible mother or father that we can be. All right. I can take questions if there are any. Stephanie? None so far. Stephanie, I'm going to go through all the slides. If there's some come in, then at the end we can talk about it. I have some new stuff on this, so don't tune out. The Intro to Parent Workshop is a 2-day workshop in St. George, Utah. We would like every family to go to one of these. Please contact Gail at evoketherapy.com for more information. We also have these new intensives that I'll be running throughout the year. And the next one, we have one this weekend for parents that we're doing. I'm starting tomorrow. But the next one after that will also be around the same date as the workshop. This is for couples. You don't have to have your child in an Evoke program at this time or have ever had them in an Evoke program. But I'm starting these intensives. We're going to have families, couples, and parents intensives out in the woods. It's going to be part out in the woods and part in our oasis where there'll be some creature comforts and some shelter so we can do some exercises, psychodrama, role plays, and really get into people's own history as a foundation for what's going on in their coupleship or what's going on in their parenting relationship or what's going on in their family. So the next one is a couples intensive, 16th to 19th. That'll be hosted by me. You can contact Stephanie at evoketherapy.com or you can go to the Evoke Therapy page / our programs for families. You can find it by looking up our programs and following the line there. But those are going to be every month now. Parent support groups coming up. We have Orange County on March 25th, Los Angeles on March 30th. Contact 49jennifer@live.com for more information and RSVP. And then I'll be out in Philadelphia on March 31st at 7 to 9 p.m. That's going to be at the Marriott Airport, the Airport Marriott in Philadelphia. And then in New York City on 54th and Broadway, the one place that we usually do it, April 1st, the next night, 6:30 to 8:30. You can RSVP to Stephanie@evoketherapy.com to register or ask more questions. These are the support groups that we ask parents to go to. We ask them to go to 6 while they're with us, at least 6. You don't have to have a child that has drugs or alcohol as a problem. Al-Anon is typically for people who have family members that have an alcohol problem or drug problem. But you can also go to CODA, which is general. Families Anonymous also is even more general. Nar-Anon, Al-Anon, Alateen. These are websites you can go to that you can find in your area. They're free. They're almost in every reasonably sized city in the country, and they're almost every day. Please follow us on Evoke Therapy's Twitter, our Facebook page, and our blog. Part of the reason why I encourage you this every time is because we make announcements. We add content all the time, and we're telling you about upcoming meetings. So if you're not on a webinar that week or that month, you can see those. By the way, webinars are a lifetime subscription, and attendance at all of these events are lifetime. You can do this for lifetime. And then if you're going to buy a book on parenting, please try and go to the Parent Alumni Foundation page. They have several topics there. If you're going to buy my book, Journey of the Heroic Parent, please buy it from there. It's the same cost on Amazon, but 10% goes to charities goes to a charity, the Alumni Foundation, to help fund people who can't afford treatment. We've already put a couple of people through the program with those funds. The next webinar is Monday, March 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be an open forum. You can submit questions in advance or live during it, but I won't have a topic pre-selected, and you can just attend and listen to other people's questions or submit your own ahead of time or during the webinar. All right, Stephanie, are there any questions that came in? What happens if I cry on the first phone call? I am still very emotional and fragile that I have been teary during this webinar already. That's okay. That's a great model for them to express vulnerability. You don't have to be clean and sterile and right and correct. Just be messy. It might be one of the greater gifts that you can give to your child is just showing up that way. And they're going to be good at listening. See, they learn to listen to feelings without interrupting or feeling paralyzed by them. They learn that when somebody expresses something, they can just hear it. They learn that when they express something, that the other person might hear it, might not disagree with it, but will just listen. So model that vulnerability, show up crying, and it'll be what it is. And it's really, really healthy to cry. So, and you can even talk about how vulnerable you feel and worried that your emotionality is going to be overwhelming or going to be a distraction. That can be a part of the phone call. You explain what rescuing sounds like. What should take place? Understanding, compassion, listening, hearing. I hear that. Maybe even empathizing. Like, I'm not in your situation now, but I've hurt or I've been in a situation. Mostly just hearing. You know what the amazing thing about this is that so much of the time we just have to get out of the way. And so when somebody, my wife or my children or my friends express pain, I just try to hear it. Say, I'm sorry. Ask if there's anything that I can do. I might even share with them, I want to take this away from you. I often do that with people. And I can't. And they usually remind me that I can't. And why would you want to take away pain and sadness when that pain and sadness is a part of a full, emotional, healthy life and also is connected to love and to joy? Right? If we take away pain and sadness, we take a part of joy away and love away. So we just listen. We just hear it. We just reflect it. We might even empathize or just express our compassion. That's it. Folks, thanks so much. I hope these points of contact are helpful, help you feel more connected to your child while they're here, and also give you some new ways to think about things. So thanks for joining us. I have one more. I will answer one more, Stephanie. Our daughter has been in Entrada for 45 days. We are choosing not to go to see her. She is 20. We feel she should handle this on her own. First time doing something on her own for herself. Thoughts? I love your intention. Absolutely. If you were saying I'm angry, then you might have some work to do, right? If you were saying you were doing this to punish her, then you might have some work to do. But what you're saying right here makes perfect sense to me. See, for me, this is love. Your heart is in it. Your intention is in it. You're trying to do something different. Are you getting it perfect? I have no idea. Is it gonna come to her in the same way you intended? I have no idea. We can't control those things. But what you're trying to do is find your center, find your heart, and then act in accordance with that. And again, that's really what the journey of the heroic parent is about. It's about teaching parents how to think about parenting instead of teaching them some technique or some way to create great children. It's teaching them to be a healthy parent, which is a happy parent, which is an enlightened parent. So I love what you're saying here. Fantastic, given what I know. All right, folks. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening. Have a great week. I'll talk to you on Monday night. Take care. Bye bye.